At 3:30 a.m. on June 17, 1944, on the Saipan beachhead, in the pitch black, the rumble of 37 Japanese tanks echoed through the ravine, heading towards the Marine radio station. Colonel Tadashi Goto was convinced that his Type 95 tanks would crush the American positions through sheer mass and surprise. Tank doctrine of the time dictated that night attacks were most successful when defenders couldn't see the approaching threat. But suddenly, like artificial suns, illumination flares blossomed overhead. Sergeant Shira gripped his bazooka tightly as the battlefield lit up as if it were daytime. Blinded by the sudden light, the Japanese tankers realized that their armor, only 12 25mm thick, would offer no protection against what the Marines were about to unleash. The tanks, intended to seize the beachhead in minutes, became clear silhouettes against the sky. No cover, no surprise, not even a glimmer of a chance. 6 hours later, 31 burning wrecks littered the ground, but the Japanese never saw the deadly chain of events unfold. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The silence that settled over the Saipan beachhead as dusk fell on June 16th held a deceptive calm. Sergeant Shira adjusted his grip on his M1 bazooka, its olive drab finish still warm from the day's heat. Around him, 6 Marines had been deepening their positions all day, which now seemed far more secure than anything they had managed in the chaotic first hours after landing. Artillery crews had finally zeroed their 105mm guns on the approaches. Bazooka teams, like Shira's, had received clear instructions on probable attack directions, with range guards marking the western ravine leading directly to the radio station behind their lines. Private First Class Robert Brown crouched beside him, checking the M6A3 rockets for the third time since sunset. The blunt-nosed warheads looked almost primitive compared to the sleek artillery, shells they had watched all day in the sky. But Brown knew full well the power of shaped charges from his training at Pendleton. The physics was simple enough. A copper cone focuses the explosion into a jet that penetrates armor regardless of angle. Against the 12 25mm plates of Japanese tanks, this would be lethal at 150 yards. Lieutenant Colonel John Walker toured the positions as darkness deepened, his calm presence solidifying what the men already felt in their bones. The beachhead was holding. More than that, it was starting to look like something that could actually survive the night. 75 Mitsaf N3 self-propelled guns were positioned in defilade behind the forward companies. Their crews executed fire missions with the precision of men who knew their craft. A platoon of M4A2 Sherman tanks waited in reserve. Their 75mm guns were loaded with high explosive rounds, capable of finishing off anything damaged by lighter weapons. The radio station hummed with activity, operators maintaining contact with the fleet at sea. The battleship USS California and her escort were assigned counter-battery missions, but their illumination rounds were available on call. 5-inch illumination flares could turn night into day over a several hundred-yard stretch of the front, and artillery officers had already plotted target concentration areas along the most likely approach routes. Shira, a veteran of Guadalcanal, knew the sound of Japanese preparations well. A distant rumble of engines had been building since midnight, punctuated by the grind of tracks on coral and sharp commands that carried further in the tropical air than men could imagine. But this felt different, larger in scale. This was the kind of noise that meant someone was throwing everything they had into one decisive breakthrough. At 03:30, the night exploded. Bugles blared throughout the ravine as the first tanks appeared in groups of 4 or 5, their silhouettes barely visible against the darker mass of the ridge behind them. Infantry rode on their hulls and followed in loose formations, their light machine guns already chattering at the Marines' suspected positions. Type 95 tanks, Shira realized, the very ones they had been briefed on, but had never seen in such numbers. 37 of them, by his quick count, moving with the confidence of crews who believed surprise was still on their side. Walker's voice crackled over the radio net, calm and clear. Quote, 8 seconds later, illumination flares burst overhead like artificial suns, their stark white light transforming the battlefield into a photographer's nightmare of harsh shadows and bleached coral. The Japanese tanks, suddenly exposed, seemed to hesitate as their crews realized the darkness was no longer their ally. Brown had his first rocket loaded and ready. The M1 Bazooka weighed only 13 pounds empty, light enough for 2 men to maneuver quickly between positions. But the shaped charge warhead made it lethal against any armor the Japanese could field. At 120 yards, well within effective range, he aligned the simple front and rear sights on the lead tank's flank and squeezed the trigger. The rocket streaked across the gap with a distinctive whoosh, striking the Type 95 just ahead of the track. The shaped charge detonated with a sharp crack that was almost anticlimactic compared to the fireworks overhead. But the tank lurched to a halt, smoke pouring from its fighting compartment. The infantry scattered from its hull as a second bazooka team engaged another target. The 37mm guns opened fire with their characteristic bark, switching between armor-piercing and canister rounds as targets presented themselves. At 500 yards, their armor-piercing rounds could penetrate 50 meters of armor at a 30-degree angle, more than enough to pierce the thin plates protecting Japanese tank crews. When infantry massed in the open, canister rounds turned the guns into large bore shotguns. Each round contained hundreds of steel balls that swept through kill zones with mechanical efficiency. Colonel Tadashi Goto had planned this assault according to a doctrine that emphasized mass and momentum. His Type 95s were equipped with 37mm guns, effective against infantry, but outranged by any weapons the Marines were using. Worse, the 12 to 25mm armor protecting his crews was designed for a different kind of war. One where anti-tank weapons were heavy, scarce, and difficult to deploy effectively. Under the light of the illumination flares, these assumptions collapsed. Imagine a night when the silence of desolate passes is suddenly broken by the rumble of approaching vehicles, when the horizon begins to flicker with the glare of headlights, and the ground trembles under the weight of steel behemoths. How can an avalanche that seems capable of sweeping everything in its path be stopped? What does a person feel when an impending threat robs them of all hope, and in their hands they hold only what seems powerless against such might? And can a single spark of tactical genius change the outcome of a battle seemingly predetermined even before it began? Each of us has at some point faced a situation where confronting an impending threat seemed simply impossible. Perhaps it was a challenge at work or a personal problem that appeared insurmountable. What would you do if a steel wave, carrying death, was bearing down on you and your arsenal was limited? Today, we will delve into one such night when everything was at stake and discover how unsung heroes, armed not only with muscle but also with sharp minds, managed to turn the tide of events using what many considered outdated or insufficient. Prepare to learn how, in pitch darkness, under the light of flares, a story of incredible resilience and tactical genius was written. For who would have thought that a simple flash of light or a relatively small but precisely aimed rocket could become the decisive argument against armored behemoths that seemed destined to overcome any obstacle? Stay with us and watch until the end to learn all the details of this astonishing story. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription, and of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. The defensive positions, carefully camouflaged in the winding ravines, waited. Forward teams with anti-tank rocket launchers moving with practiced precision between pre-prepared points, fired from ranges where a miss was impossible, then instantly relocated before enemy fire could reach them. Shaped charges, requiring no high kinetic energy to penetrate armor, performed their task through a chemical reaction that transformed a copper liner into a plasma jet capable of burning through steel plate like a hot torch through butter. As more enemy vehicles stalled or burst into flames, self-propelled guns entered the fray. Their 75mm cannons, possessing decisive high explosive power at close range. Their crews had been waiting for such targets since the initial deployment. Shells rained down with thunderous impacts, shaking the ground and scattering debris in all directions. A detachment of heavy tanks, whose armor was significantly reinforced compared to the self-propelled guns, moved forward to flanking positions from which they could attack the sides of the enemy columns. At this range, under the illumination provided by powerful searchlights from the rear lines, it was less a battle than methodical target practice. These vehicles carried the same 75mm gun as the self-propelled units, but their improved armor protection and mobility allowed them to quickly reposition as the battle evolved, providing support where it was most needed. Sergeant Smith, reloading another rocket, watched as his gunner, Corporal Jones, selected the next target. An enemy light tank had approached within 100 meters of their cover, close enough to discern the panic in the movements of its commander. Desperately trying to bring his gun to bear on the defenders' positions, the rocket, fired with composure, slammed into the tank's side, penetrating its relatively thin armor and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The vehicle lurched to a halt, its main gun pointing uselessly skyward, and acrid smoke billowed from its hatches. By dawn, the narrow pass the enemy had so desperately sought to overcome was littered with dozens of burning wrecks. Their crews were dead or scattered. The vanguard of the enemy armored formation ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, its commander among the casualties. But in those first minutes after midnight, when the illumination flares turned night into day and shaped charges began their deadly work, the outcome was still being decided by men like Jones and Smith. Soldiers who had learned to turn defensive power into precise destructive firepower that no attack based solely on numerical superiority could overcome. The sector commander, Colonel Anderson, observed the battle's progression from his command post, well aware that victory would come not from any single weapon, but from the meticulous coordination of interlocking fire. The western pass, leading to the crucial communications node, seemed an obvious attack direction during daytime planning sessions. Perhaps too obvious, yet the enemy still chose it. Now, that choice worked to the defenders' advantage, funneling enemy armor into pre-prepared kill zones that had been established with the methodical precision Anderson had honed over 2 decades of peacetime. The deadly trap was functioning exactly as intended. Sergeant Jones's anti-tank teams disabled the lead elements in the first minutes of contact, knocking out tracks and hitting crews at ranges where shaped charges were guaranteed to penetrate armor. The light enemy tanks, with their 12 25mm armor, offered no significant protection against weapons that generated their lethality from chemical energy rather than kinetic impact. Each rocket carried a copper cone that focused the explosive force into a superheated jet, capable of burning through steel plate regardless of angle or ricochet. As the enemy advance stalled under the initial rocket fire, the 37mm guns shifted their attention to the infantry riding on the tank hulls and following in loose formations. Corporal Markov trained his crew to switch between armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds with practiced efficiency, instantly assessing the tactical situation and selecting the ammunition best suited for the target. At 400 meters, his gun could penetrate the frontal armor of any enemy light tank on the battlefield. When infantry massed in the open, high explosive rounds transformed the weapon into a large caliber shotgun, sweeping through kill zones with hundreds of steel balls, mowing down the advancing ranks. The 75mm self-propelled guns represented the next echelon in the defensive system, positioned in defilade behind the forward companies. Their crews possessed decisive, high explosive power at close range and the mobility to redeploy as the battle developed. Staff Sergeant Petrov positioned his vehicle to cover the northern approach to the communications node. Its 75mm gun was loaded with rounds that could finish off any tank damaged by lighter weapons, leaving it no chance of escape. Behind the self-propelled guns, a platoon of heavy tanks waited with the patience of hunters who knew their prey was being driven directly toward them. These vehicles carried the same 75mm gun as the self-propelled units, but with better armor protection and the tactical flexibility afforded by full-track mobility. Their crews had been briefed on the enemy armor they were likely to encounter. Thinly armored vehicles armed with 37mm and 47mm guns, effective against infantry but outranged by the defensive weapons in this terrain and under these lighting conditions. The illumination flares overhead provided the crucial element that tied all these weapons together. Without the lighting, enemy tanks could have closed to ranges where their less powerful guns might still inflict casualties. Under the stark white light of the powerful naval flares, surprise was impossible, and camouflage became more of a disadvantage than an asset. The tank commanders, who had planned to use the darkness for a massed approach, now found themselves silhouetted against the rocks, like targets on a firing range, unable to escape the ubiquitous light. Private Murakami, hunched over the 37mm gun of his light tank, struggled to identify targets that appeared and disappeared with maddening unpredictability. The defenders' positions were prepared with overlapping fields of fire, denying his crew a clear aim while simultaneously exposing his tank to weapons capable of penetrating its armor from ranges where return fire was ineffective. Have you ever wondered why, despite all efforts, some battles seem lost before they even begin? What if the boldest attacks come to nothing, and time-tested tactics suddenly stop working? Perhaps you too have faced situations where familiar approaches failed you in a new reality. Today, we will delve into a story using one of the most brutal clashes of World War II as an example, to see how stubbornness and outdated dogmas shatter against a carefully planned strategy and modern weaponry. How did an entire tank column, thrown into battle with faith in its irresistibility, come to be annihilated in a matter of hours? And what lessons can we draw from this collision of past and future? On the island of Saipan, in that very ravine where the events unfolded, a once unshakable doctrine, dictating the deployment of 37 tanks, was based on the conviction that their mass and momentum could breach any prepared defense. However, these notions were true for a completely different type of battle, for another era. What Commander Walker had planned earlier in the day was now coming to fruition with astonishing precision, like an exercise perfected on a training ground. Japanese tanks, advancing, encountered an insurmountable wall of fire. American rocket launchers instantly crippled their mobility and shocked crews at distances of 100 to 150 yards. The ideal range for maximum effectiveness of their shape-charge warheads. 37mm guns opened fire at ranges up to 500 yards, expertly switching between armor-piercing rounds, capable of penetrating up to 53mm of armor at a 30-degree angle, and canister rounds which turned infantry concentrations into merciless casualty statistics. And 75mm guns, both self-propelled and tank-mounted, completed the work, finishing off anything that could still move or posed any threat to the Marine positions. Colonel Goto, commanding the Japanese forces, launched his regiment in an attack using tactics that had once brought success in China and the early stages of the Pacific campaigns. Back then, American forces did not possess adequate anti-tank weaponry and were not properly trained in its effective use. But Saipan proved to be a completely different place, a new milestone in military history. The Marines operating these formidable weapons had been training with bazookas since late 1943, thoroughly studying the advantages that chemical energy weapons offered against thin armor. They understood perfectly that the M1 launcher's lack of recoil allowed them to quickly change firing positions, and the shape-charge warhead made the thickness of enemy armor absolutely irrelevant at such close combat ranges. Stay with us and watch until the end to find out how this battle concluded and what lessons were learned from it. We would be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you are watching from. Private Brown, with movements honed to automatic precision, loaded another rocket. The blunt-nosed M6A3 warhead might have looked crude compared to the streamlined projectiles of traditional artillery, but its effectiveness against Japanese tanks had already been repeatedly proven in combat. At a distance of 120 yards, the rocket would strike with sufficient velocity, ensuring proper detonation of the shaped charge, and the resulting jet of molten copper would effortlessly penetrate the side armor of a Type 95. The advantage in rate of fire belonged entirely to the Marines. Bazooka teams could reload and engage new targets significantly faster than tank crews could aim their weapons and find suitable firing solutions. 37mm guns fired up to 25 rounds per minute when crews worked in a rhythm perfected over months of grueling training. Even heavier weaponry maintained a tempo that allowed them to engage multiple targets before the Japanese could organize any effective return fire. Don't switch. Stay with us and watch this video until the end, because the most interesting part is yet to come. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription, and of course, don't forget to share in the comments from what corner of the world you are watching us. As the battle entered its second phase, Commander Walker noted with satisfaction that the entire defensive system was functioning with astonishing precision, strictly according to plan. The overlapping fire, which blanketed the western ravine, left no gaps where Japanese tanks could find any cover or concealment. Illumination, provided by powerful naval artillery, completely eliminated the darkness that might have facilitated covert infiltration or flanking maneuvers by the enemy. Most importantly, it was the combination of various weapons that gave his Marines the ability to engage targets at distances where their superiority in firepower and protection became absolutely decisive. The Type 95 tanks, which had seemed so formidable in the pre-dawn darkness, were now exposed as obsolete machines, undoubtedly operated by brave men, but sent on a mission doomed to fail. Their 12 to 25mm armor was sufficient only against small arms and shell fragments, but utterly useless against shaped charge weapons, which bypassed traditional protection through chemical rather than kinetic effects. Their 37mm guns could penetrate Marine flak jackets and sandbagged positions, but clearly lacked the power to engage American tanks or self-propelled guns at effective ranges. Sergeant Shira selected another target as the Japanese assault, as if by inertia, continued to drive tanks directly into the kill zone. The tactical task now seemed almost elementary. Spot, aim, fire, relocate, reload. The shape charge did all the rest, transforming the physics of an explosion into armor penetration that no steel plate could stop. Around him, the deadly chain continued its methodical, relentless work, each weapon system contributing to an outcome that became inevitable once the illuminating flares turned night into day. The 5-inch gun of the USS California roared again at 03:45, launching another volley of illumination rounds into the sky over the western ravine, where Colonel Guto's tanks continued their doomed advance. The flares burst with mechanical precision, each one bathing several hundred yards of coral and scrub with harsh, blinding white light. What began as a coordinated attack rapidly devolved into a series of individual tank actions as crews found themselves separated by disabled vehicles and increasingly accurate Marine fire. Sergeant Shira tracked another Type 95 through his Bazookas sights as it attempted to maneuver around a burning hulk, the third destroyed by his team that night. The Japanese tank commander tried to use the wreckage for cover, but the continuous illumination rounds eliminated any Scotty 35 where Japanese armor might hide. At 110 yards, well within the M6A3 rocket's effective range, Shira pulled the trigger and watched as the shape charge detonated in the tank's rear. The explosion was sharp and brief, but within seconds, thick smoke billowed from the engine compartment. Private Brown was already loading the next round, his movements automatic despite the chaos surrounding their position. The blunt-nosed warhead slid expertly into the launcher, and Brown tapped Shira on the shoulder, signaling readiness. Since the start of the battle, they had fired 8 rockets, achieving 6 direct hits and 2 near misses that forced Japanese crews to abandon their vehicles. Shape-charge technology, which had seemed almost theoretical during training, proved devastatingly effective against armor that offered no significant protection from penetrating elements utilizing chemical energy. Imagine a night where the battlefield isn't shrouded in darkness but bathed in blinding light, turning advancing enemy tanks into easy targets. Imagine standing against steel monsters that yesterday were considered invincible, but today burn one after another? Is this even possible? How did a handful of soldiers, armed with seemingly simple weapons, manage to halt and utterly destroy an entire tank regiment in one of the fiercest battles of World War II? And most importantly, how can this experience help you tackle your own seemingly insurmountable challenges? Many of us have faced situations where everything seems to be against us, where the odds are uneven, and victory seems like an impossible dream. We've been there, on the brink of despair, when there seemed to be no way out. But the story we'll tell today isn't just about war. It's about how ingenuity, tactics, and determination can turn any situation on its head. Today, we'll uncover the secrets of how Marines on Saipan turned a confident tank attack into a slaughter, and how their lessons remain relevant to this day. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And, of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. On that fateful night, as the Japanese 9th Tank Regiment advanced, hoping to crush the Marine defenses on Saipan, a deadly surprise awaited them. The Marines weren't just waiting, they were ready. To the left of the main defensive line, Corporal Martinez, with clockwork precision, continued his relentless work with the 37mm gun. His crew, anticipating the inevitable, had switched to armor-piercing rounds well in advance as more and more Japanese tanks entered their deadly kill zone. Each of Martinez's shots was the result of careful aiming, fired at ranges where armor penetration was guaranteed. At 450 yards, his gun could penetrate over 50 millimeters of armor at a 30-degree angle, a figure more than double the protection provided by the thickest armor plates on the Japanese Type 95 tanks. The tank he now had in his sights suddenly froze as his shell, piercing the turret ring, not only disabled the main gun but, very likely, killed the gunner inside. Japanese infantry, who had arrived on the battlefield riding on the tank's hulls, found themselves dismounted directly into kill zones swept by devastating canister fire. Martinez, with incredible speed honed by months of grueling training, switched ammunition types, loading rounds that turned his gun into something akin to a large-caliber shotgun. Each canister round contained hundreds of steel balls that spread in a deadly fan, specifically designed to clear trenches and suppress infantry positions against troops caught in the open under the ominous light of the illumination flares. The result was truly devastating. It was at this critical moment, as the first wave of the attack began to falter, that Staff Sergeant Williams brought his 75mm M3 self-propelled gun into action as Japanese tanks approached the very perimeter of the Marine lines. His gun's high explosive rounds were specifically designed to complete the destruction initiated by lighter weapons. Any tank that survived bazooka hits or 37 mm penetrations now faced a weapon capable of utterly obliterating it. His first target was a Type 95 tank that had already lost a track to bazooka fire, but was still desperately trying to shell Marine positions with its 37 mm gun. The 75 mm round hit precisely below the turret, and the tank instantly vanished in a blinding ball of orange flame. These initial strikes were just a prelude to what was to come. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And, of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. While individual strong points held the line, a platoon of Shermans, commanded by Lieutenant Hayes, skillfully advanced, taking positions from which they could attack the flanks of the Japanese tank columns with their powerful 75 mm guns. Lieutenant Hayes positioned his M4A2 to completely cover the southern approach to the strategically important radio station. His crew loaded high explosive rounds that outranged anything the Japanese tanks could field. The advantage in such a fight belonged entirely to the side with better optics, longer range guns, and, crucially, sufficient illumination to use both effectively. Each flash of a Sherman's muzzle heralded a new turn in this deadly game. Meanwhile, inside one of the Japanese Type 95 tanks, Private Nakamura struggled immensely to traverse his tank's turret towards the muzzle flashes that appeared and disappeared with frantic and unpredictable speed. The 37 mm gun, which had been effective enough against Chinese forces and early American units, now proved utterly useless against Marines who had learned to coordinate their fire with astonishing precision. His tank's 12 mm frontal armor could stop rifle bullets and shell fragments, but it offered no protection against bazooka rockets, which had already disabled most of his squadron. A shaped charge, hitting the left side of his tank, penetrated the armor with a sharp crack, a sound that had become the characteristic melody of this battle. Nakamura felt the shockwave rip through the fighting compartment, followed by the acrid smoke of burning metal and rubber. The driver slumped lifelessly over the controls, hydraulic fluid gushing from ruptured hoses. Within seconds, the fighting compartment was completely filled with thick smoke, making breathing impossible and sight useless. This was the end for many. Colonel Guto threw 37 tanks into this attack, naively believing that their mass and surprise would crush the Marine defenses. However, surprise instantly vanished, annihilated by illumination rounds that transformed the night battlefield into a brightly lit kill zone, where Japanese armor stood out as clear silhouettes against the sky. The doctrine that had worked in earlier campaigns assumed American forces lacked adequate anti-tank weapons and the training to use them effectively. On Saipan, these assumptions proved fatal. By 0430, 24 Japanese tanks had been destroyed in the 6th Marine Sector alone. Their hulks were scattered across the coral reef like grim monuments to tactical obsolescence. Bazooka teams destroyed approximately half of them. Their shape-charge warheads proved that chemical energy could penetrate armor regardless of its thickness at these ranges. The 37 mm guns destroyed another 6 tanks with armor-piercing rounds that easily penetrated armor at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Heavier armament, 75 mm self-propelled guns and Shermans finished off the remaining with high explosive rounds, leaving nothing salvageable. Japanese infantry continued their advance until almost 07. But without armor support, their attacks catastrophically lacked the punch to seriously threaten Marine positions. Canister rounds from the 37mm guns literally swept the approaches to the radio station, while Marine small arms fire eliminated every single soldier attempting to breach the perimeter. Illumination rounds continued to burst overhead with mechanical regularity, completely eliminating any possibility of concealment or surprise. When dawn finally broke over the western ravine, a scene of complete destruction was revealed. 31 Japanese tanks lay inert on the coral reef, some still burning, others already beginning to rust in the humid tropical climate. The 9th Tank Regiment ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Its commander was dead, and the surviving crews dispersed. The Beachhead, which was supposed to be overrun in a matter of hours, had held with almost negligible losses compared to the slaughter inflicted on the attackers. Marine Shira, lowering his bazooka, surveyed the battlefield with the deep satisfaction of a craftsman who had performed his work with impeccable professional skill. Around him, other Marines were already beginning to count the wrecks and gather intelligence from the destroyed vehicles. The shape-charge warheads, which had seemed almost too simple during training, proved their astonishing effectiveness in a tank battle that would be studied in military academies for decades. On Saipan, American industrial might and tactical innovation clashed with Japanese courage and tactical rigidity. And the outcome was never in doubt once the illumination rounds began to fall. Dawn revealed the full extent of the disaster that befell Colonel Guto's 9th Tank Regiment. Across the coral flats leading to the radio station, 31 charred and twisted hulks marked the end of Japanese armored power on Saipan, forever inscribing that night into history. Imagine how established norms crumble when what seemed unshakable yesterday turns to dust today. In a world where power was measured by armor thickness and gun caliber, a tool suddenly emerged that could change the very concept of warfare. How could one seemingly simple invention overturn entrenched ideas about combat, turning formidable tanks into heaps of scrap metal? What compelled experienced commanders to re-evaluate all their tactics, developed over years? And how did an ordinary infantryman, armed with a lightweight device, suddenly become capable of stopping a steel behemoth that previously required entire artillery batteries to destroy? This story isn't just about a new weapon. It's about a turning point where innovation clashed with tradition, and the latter proved powerless. We will delve into events where a single tool changed the course of a battle, showing that size doesn't always matter. What we'll discuss today will make many wonder. Isn't something similar happening in our own lives when old methods suddenly stop working and new, unexpected approaches open the way to success? This is a tale of how bold thinking and engineering genius can solve a problem that seemed insurmountable. We hope you'll stay with us and watch this video until the end. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And, of course, please let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. After the roar of the guns subsided and an ominous silence fell over Saipan, Sergeant Shira, with the methodical thoroughness of a professional soldier, assessed the battle damage. He moved through the wreckage, noting the precise results achieved by various weapons against the Type 95 tanks, which now lay scattered across the field like broken toys. The counting process itself revealed the incredible complexity of large-scale combat operations. Lieutenant Colonel Walker's post-battle report recorded at least 24 tanks destroyed in the immediate 6th Marine sector. But Marine reports and post-battle counts across the entire beachhead indicated 31 fully disabled tanks. This discrepancy vividly demonstrated the chaos inherent in night fighting, where sector boundaries became meaningless once the engagement began. Daylight recounts revealed additional wrecks, and inevitable duplication occurred when different units claimed the same kills. Reconnaissance teams were already swarming around these wrecks, meticulously photographing the nature of the damage and collecting samples of Japanese armor steel for subsequent metallurgical analysis. The thin steel protecting these vehicles represented the best that Japanese industry could offer in 1944. However, it proved absolutely inadequate against new weapons that generated their lethality through chemical rather than kinetic energy. 12 to 25 millimeters of armor plate, capable of stopping conventional shells, offered no significant resistance to shape-charge warheads, which burned through steel with jets of molten copper. This was a breakthrough that called into question the entire traditional philosophy of tank design. Private Brown, standing by a Type 95 tank that was his team's last target for the night, carefully inspected the spot where an M6A3 rocket had penetrated the rear and detonated inside the fighting compartment. The entry hole was surprisingly small, perhaps only 3 inches in diameter, but the internal damage was catastrophic. The principle of shaped charges was elegant in its simplicity. They focused the energy of an explosion into a narrow jet, moving at speeds measured in miles per second, creating temperatures high enough to melt steel on contact. This physics, turning basic chemistry into a means of armor penetration, rendered metal thickness virtually irrelevant. The bazooka proved its effectiveness on Saipan in ways that surprised even its most devoted proponents, and this was only the beginning. We hope you'll stay with us and watch this video until the end. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, please let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. The 236 6-inch M1 launcher weighed only 13 pounds empty, light enough for a 2-man team to move quickly between shots without revealing their positions. More importantly, the weapon produced no recoil that might give away firing positions to enemy observers, making it ideal for stealth operations. Shira's team fired 11 rockets during the engagement, achieving 9 hits and forcing 2 Japanese crews to abandon their vehicles, a testament to its incredible accuracy and destructive power. The shaped charge warheads worked exactly as intended, penetrating armor at ranges up to 150 yards, regardless of the angle of impact or plate thickness. Staff Sergeant Williams, walking along the line of destroyed tanks, felt a growing understanding of the value of this weapon system, which had seemed almost too revolutionary during training. The M1 bazooka represented a fundamental shift in anti-tank warfare, replacing heavy guns that required multiple crew members and complex positioning with a lightweight weapon that could be operated by ordinary riflemen. The principle of chemical energy meant that a private with 6 weeks of training could destroy tanks that previously required artillery pieces or specialized anti-tank guns to defeat. The humidity problems that plagued early bazooka operations in the Pacific were largely resolved thanks to improvements in the M9 rocket's design. The blunt-nosed warheads used on Saipan contained copper cones that were precisely manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, ensuring consistent performance even in harsh tropical conditions, capable of disabling less sophisticated weapons. What began as an experimental system was rapidly becoming standard equipment for Marine infantry units expecting to encounter enemy armor. Colonel Guto's body was found next to his Type 97 command tank, which had been struck by several bazooka rounds before a 75mm shell from one of the Shermans utterly finished it off. His death symbolized more than just the loss of a regimental commander. It marked the end of Japanese tank doctrine, designed for a different type of war, and showed that the world had changed. Mass tank attacks, which had proven effective in China, and during the early stages of the Pacific campaigns, were rendered obsolete against defenders equipped with adequate anti-tank weapons and trained to use them effectively. The tactical lessons gleaned from the wreckage were profound and undeniable. Japanese armored vehicles were designed for infantry support missions, where their thin plates offered sufficient protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The 37mm and 47mm guns, which armed most Japanese tanks, were effective against lightly armored targets, but clearly lacked the power to engage American armor at significant distances. Most critically, Japanese tank doctrine posited that night attacks would provide the advantages of surprise and concealment, which could overcome superior enemy firepower. Under the illumination of star shells, these assumptions completely collapsed. 5-inch naval shells, turning night into day, eliminated any possibility of surprise or concealment, while the superior optics and fire control systems on American weapons allowed for accurate targeting at ranges where Japanese guns were utterly ineffective. The casualty ratio, achieved in the night battle, 31 Japanese tanks destroyed against negligible Marine armored losses, reflected technological and tactical advantages that extended far beyond simple numerical superiority. Intelligence officers examining the destroyed equipment found evidence of hasty modifications, indicating Japanese awareness of their armor's inadequacy. Some tanks had additional steel plates welded to vital areas, while others showed signs of improvised side skirts designed to defeat shape-charge warheads. These field modifications proved futile against weapons that penetrated armor through chemical energy rather than kinetic impact. However, they clearly revealed the Japanese understanding that their equipment was obsolete and the world of war had changed forever. Imagine a battlefield. You are a tank crewman at the helm of a steel behemoth, once considered the pinnacle of military power. Your mission: to break through defenses, to crush the enemy. But suddenly, something goes wrong. What seemed invincible yesterday is today transformed into a flaming coffin. How did everything you believed become obsolete overnight? Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable, where your usual methods failed, and the enemy always seemed a step ahead? We know that feeling. Once, we also thought the usual rules of the game were unshakable. But history has proven otherwise many times. Today, we will tell you about a moment in the Pacific War when the familiar laws of armored combat were rewritten forever on the battlefield. How could one seemingly simple rocket completely overturn the course of tank combat, turning formidable machines into useless piles of metal? Can outdated tactics lead to the complete annihilation of an entire military unit in just a few hours. And how did infantry, armed with a new marvel of technology, become the bane of armored monsters? Something generals of the past could not have dreamed of. Prepare to learn how an innovation of just 2 pounds of explosives changed the fate of an entire regiment and the course of the war. What you will see will make you rethink your notions of strength and vulnerability. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to comment where you're watching us from. At the core of this revolution was the M6A3 rocket, equipped with a shape-charged warhead. This was no ordinary explosive device. Inside, approximately 2 pounds of explosive were artfully arranged around a precisely machined copper cone. Upon impact, detonation occurred not in the traditional manner, but from back to front, instantly transforming the copper cone into a narrowly focused jet of molten metal traveling at an incredible speed, nearly 2 miles per second. This jet maintained its integrity for several inches, allowing it to effortlessly burn through even the toughest Japanese tank armor, penetrating into the crew compartments and causing lethal destruction. Sergeant Shira, one of those who mastered this formidable weapon, methodically collected the empty tubes scattered around his firing position. Each was a silent testament. Another Japanese tank would never threaten the Marines. The statistics were astounding. 11 rockets fired resulted in 9 confirmed kills, an efficiency rate that until recently seemed fantastical for conventional anti-tank weapons. The principle of the shape charge, in essence, transformed every infantryman into a tank killer, completely eliminating the need for cumbersome, specialized anti-tank guns that were difficult to position and highly vulnerable to counterfire. This was merely a prelude to what awaited the enemy. When dawn brought the burial teams to their somber mission of extracting bodies from the mangled Japanese tanks, the true scale of the catastrophe became undeniable. The 9th Tank Regiment, once a formidable armored unit, had been wiped off the face of the earth. In less than 4 hours of intense combat, an entire unit ceased to exist. Personnel losses approached 100%, and equipment was completely destroyed. The regiment, destined to lead the operation to retake Saipan, would never see battle again. Its few survivors were scattered, and its tactical doctrine, recently considered cutting-edge, proved fatally obsolete. Meanwhile, the bazooka teams, the primary architects of this rout, were already dispassionately cleaning their weapons, preparing for new challenges. Their unwavering faith in American technology and flawless training had been forged in the crucible of successful night combat. They had vividly demonstrated that shape-charged munitions could penetrate any armor the Japanese could field, ultimately transforming the Pacific War into an uncompromising contest between America's colossal industrial potential and Japan's fierce courage. A contest with only one possible outcome. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to comment where you're watching us from. 2 nights later, fatigue, heavy and sticky like the tropical humidity, settled over the Marine positions. Yet, with it came a sense of relief. The armored threat, which had dominated tactical planning since D-Day, was now gone forever. Sergeant Shira, his M1 bazooka, almost an extension of himself, sat in his foxhole, methodically cleaning each component of the weapon. He knew that in conditions designed for destroying equipment, only such attention to detail would guarantee combat readiness. Around him, 6 Marines remained vigilant, their quiet confidence betraying men who had not only endured the enemy's onslaught, but emerged victorious from the fiercest struggle. This calm was earned, but the war was not yet over. On the night of June 18th, the Japanese made another desperate attempt, but this time their attacks, devoid of armored support, lacked the former power to seriously threaten the beachhead perimeter. Infantry assaults, which might have had a chance against unprepared positions, now shattered against the Marines' resilience. The Americans expertly integrated their weapons into overlapping sectors of fire, leaving the enemy no loophole for penetration. 37mm guns, recently effective tank destroyers, now switched to canister rounds, literally sweeping approaching enemies with a hail of steel balls. Meanwhile, bazooka teams regrouped to cover so-called dead zones inaccessible to conventional weaponry. Lieutenant Colonel Walker carefully studied intelligence reports that clearly painted a picture of Japanese desperation engulfing all of Saipan. With the destruction of the 9th Tank Regiment, enemy commanders lost their primary tool for mobile counterattacks against the steadily expanding beachhead. Type 95 tanks, once considered the pinnacle of Japanese armored technology, proved lamentably obsolete machines, piloted by fearless but doomed men carrying out inherently impossible missions. Their fate was sealed. The armor plates of the Type 95 tanks, ranging from 12 to 25 millimeters thick, proved utterly powerless against the new shape-charge weapons. These weapons, unlike traditional projectiles relying on kinetic impact, bypassed any protection through destructive chemical energy. The kill chain, honed to perfection during the recent night battle, was already being actively studied and modified for subsequent operations. Illumination provided by powerful naval artillery completely deprived Japanese forces of the crucial darkness needed for tactical surprise. In these conditions, bazooka teams operating at ranges of 100 to 150 yards could engage targets with almost 100% assurance of armor penetration. The 37mm guns, in turn, provided accurate fire at greater distances. Their armor-piercing rounds were capable of penetrating over 50 millimeters of protection at a 30-degree angle of incidence, and the 75mm guns, mounted on both self-propelled units and tanks, completed the task, possessing enough power to destroy any target that survived the barrage from lighter weapons. In this chaos of war, Private Brown became something of a legend among the Marines. His role as a bazooka loader, responsible for 9 confirmed tank kills, earned him deserved recognition, which he accepted with the quiet pride of a professional who had flawlessly performed his job. The M6A3 rockets, which Private Brown so masterfully handled in the heat of battle, embodied technology that fundamentally changed infantry warfare in ways that staff planners were only just beginning to comprehend. Each warhead contained meticulously designed components capable of converting conventional explosives into highly effective armor-piercing systems. They were capable of overcoming any defense the Japanese could field. The principle of the shape charge itself was elegantly simple. The explosive, arranged around a copper cone, detonated from back to front. This directed explosion transformed the metal into a super high-velocity jet, moving at speeds measured in miles per second. The jet maintained its integrity for several inches, easily piercing steel plate, regardless of its thickness or angle, and penetrating into crew compartments, causing fatal consequences. The physics underlying this process did not require complex calculations. Proper warhead detonation was sufficient to guarantee penetration of any armor at effective ranges, but this was only part of a much larger picture. Staff Sergeant Williams, inspecting an M375mm self-propelled mount that served as the foundation of the defensive fire plan, couldn't help but note how American industrial might had brilliantly translated theoretical requirements into perfect practical weapon systems. This tracked vehicle, equipped with sufficient armor to reliably protect its crew from small arms fire and shell fragments, simultaneously carried a gun capable of engaging any target in the Pacific theater. An even more important aspect was its exceptional mobility, allowing it to quickly move between firing positions, thereby making it significantly harder for enemy observers to predict the direction of the next strike. A platoon of Sherman M4A2 tanks, providing observation during the battle, vividly demonstrated the key principles of American tank philosophy, prioritizing mechanical reliability and crew protection over pure firepower. These tanks carried 75mm guns whose range surpassed anything in the Japanese arsenal, and their armor provided reliable protection against the 37mm and 47mm guns that equipped most enemy vehicles. In the perfectly illuminated battlefield created by powerful naval artillery, all these advantages became absolutely decisive, determining the outcome of the battle and changing the face of war. Have you ever wondered how a single, seemingly insignificant detail can overturn an entire strategy you're used to? How time-tested methods, successful for years, suddenly become not just useless, but deadly. It's so familiar, isn't it? We've all faced moments when we stubbornly clung to the old, even as the world around us had already changed, and the price for that proved incredibly high. What if we told you a story when not just money or career was at stake, but thousands of lives, and the outcome of an entire war depended on whether some could adapt and others could not? In this video, we will reveal how one night battle on a distant Pacific island forever changed the course of World War II, demonstrating that even the most formidable forces can be stopped by innovations that seemed like science fiction yesterday. How was this possible? And why are the lessons of that battle still relevant today, forcing us to reevaluate our approaches to any strategy? Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to comment where you're watching us from. The death of Colonel Goto was not merely the loss of a high-ranking officer in the Japanese order of battle. It marked the collapse of an entire tactical doctrine that had been successfully employed for many years in China and during the early stages of the Pacific campaigns. In those times, American forces often lacked adequate anti-tank weaponry, and no less importantly, proper training for its effective use. Goto's meticulously planned mass tank attacks were based on the belief that surprise and powerful inertial momentum could overwhelm any enemy superiority in firepower. However, these seemingly unshakable assumptions proved fatal when confronted by defending Marines who were now equipped with bazookas, and crucially, had artificial illumination that allowed them to be used with deadly accuracy. Intelligence teams, already swarming around the wrecks of destroyed Japanese tanks, rapidly compiled reports that were destined to fundamentally alter American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the war in the Pacific. The effectiveness of shape-charge weapons against relatively thin armor was proven beyond doubt. But equally stunning was the demonstration that competently coordinated defensive fire could destroy attacking formations before they could even close to effective range. The lesson was crystal clear. Integrating various weapon systems created a synergy whose results far exceeded the simple sum of the individual capabilities of each element. Don't change the channel, stay with us, and watch until the end. Your like and subscribe are the best thanks for us. And, of course, we are eagerly awaiting your comments from wherever in the world you are watching us. Officers like Shira clearly understood that the night battle on Saipan became something far greater than just a successful defensive operation. The bazooka, a weapon that, until recently, was perceived almost as an experimental curiosity during training, had now transformed into a proven and formidable combat implement. It was destined to become a standard issue for Marine infantry units preparing for engagements with enemy armor. This 2.36-inch launcher provided ordinary riflemen with an unprecedented capability to destroy tanks, which previously required specialized anti-tank guns. This fundamentally shifted the tactical balance of power between armor and infantry. Within a matter of weeks, the island of Saipan would be declared completely secure. Its airfields would rapidly transform into strategically vital bases for B-29 bombers, which would soon begin the methodical and merciless destruction of Japan's industrial potential. The tank attack, originally conceived as a crushing blow intended to drive the Marines back into the sea, instead only accelerated the timeline of Japan's defeat, depriving it of invaluable mobile reserves that might have prolonged the campaign. With the complete annihilation of the 9th Tank Regiment, Japanese commanders lost their primary tool for launching counterattacks against the continuously expanding American perimeter. However, the broader implications of this route extended far beyond Saipan itself. The tactical methods that had proven their undeniable effectiveness in that night battle would be meticulously refined and universally applied throughout all remaining operations in the Mariana Islands. There, Japanese forces regularly encountered American units that were now not only equipped with effective anti-tank weapons, but also impeccably trained to coordinate their use. Shape-charge technology, which in 1943 still seemed an almost theoretical concept, rapidly became the standard by which infantry anti-tank capability was henceforth measured. Private Brown cleaned his rifle with the same methodical thoroughness with which he had recently loaded bazooka rockets. He, like many others, recognized that both types of weapons, despite their external differences, represented different facets of the same fundamental truth. American industrial might, when properly directed, was capable of producing equipment that endowed individual soldiers with capabilities that previously required much larger and more numerous units. The M1 bazooka, weighing only about 13 pounds when empty, possessed the incredible ability to destroy tanks, machines whose creation required months of intense enemy production effort and years of crew training. Gradually, The fatigue that had gripped the Marine positions after the grueling night began to give way to a quiet, deep satisfaction as the true scale of their victory became apparent. They had not merely survived a massive night attack. They had practically annihilated an entire enemy regiment, while suffering losses that were almost negligible compared to the colossal damage inflicted on the enemy. The casualty ratio achieved during the battle vividly demonstrated technological and tactical advantages that only intensified as American production reached full capacity and training programs refined the lessons learned directly in combat. On Saipan, American adaptability in real combat clashed with Japanese tactical inflexibility, and the result of this confrontation showed that properly integrated solutions, applied by small units, were capable of defeating much larger formations if those formations adhered to outdated and dogmatic doctrine. Artificial illumination, which transformed the profound darkness of night into a semblance of day, combined with shape-charged projectiles that rendered armor thickness utterly irrelevant, created battlefield conditions where Japanese valor, however unparalleled, could no longer compensate for their technological and tactical inferiority. This gap only widened as the war continued.